Hello, friends. Welcome back to English Classes Online. My name is Benjamin. Today's video is on Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. Summary and analysis. We are going to look at a summary and analysis of this novel by Emily Bronte. If you are new to this channel, kindly subscribe to the channel by clicking on the subscribe button below. Make sure you click on the bell icon as well, so that whenever a new video goes live on this channel, you will be notified instantly. Let's dive into the lesson right away. What is the basic story of Wuthering Heights? Now, Wuthering Heights is a tragic romance novel in which Emily Bronte tells the story of love and revenge revolving around the inhabitants of a desolate farmhouse called Wuthering Heights. The novel tells the life story of Heathcliff, an adopted child from childhood about 7 years old to his death in his late 30s. Heathcliff rises in his adopted family and then is later reduced to the status of a servant by Hindley, that is Mr. Earnshaw's biological son. Heathcliff runs away when the young woman he loves decides to marry another man. That's the story of Heathcliff, and the novel Wuthering Heights is essentially about the life of the man called Heathcliff. In Wuthering Heights, Emily Bronte portrays unfulfilled love in a tragic romance novel. So we can call this novel a tragic romance novel because you keep reading about the deaths of the characters. The whole story of the novel seems to highlight the pains of unfulfilled love and the destructive nature of revenge. These are two powerful themes in the novel that run throughout the novel. Now, the novel opens with Mr. Lockwood, a new tenant at Thrushcross Grange, writing in his diary about his visit to his landlord, Mr. Heathcliff. So you can see when the story begins, we find that Mr. Heathcliff is already a landlord. He begins as an adopted child in the family of the Earnshaws, but at this point in time, he is already the owner of both Wuthering Heights and Thrushcross Grange. All right, I hope I got that pronunciation right. Thrushcross Grange. Right? All right, so that is exactly what the novel is saying. We see that the narrator is essentially Mr. Lockwood, although he narrates the story as told by Nellie Dean. All right. Now, Lockwood has gone 2 times to Mr. Cliff's residence at a nearby manor called Wuthering Heights. During his second visit, he meets some mysterious residents at Wuthering Heights. Lockwood asks the housekeeper, Nellie, to know about Heathcliff and the Wuthering Heights. Then Nellie recalls a complicated story of 2 families, the Earnshaws and the Lintons. Now, who is Nellie, by the way? Nellie is a servant to 3 generations of the Earnshaws and 2 of the Linton family. All right, so Nellie is the storyteller. She tells the story of the 2 families. And Lockwood merely reports what Nellie has told him. Of course, he edits aspects of the story and tries as much as he can to shorten the story. Now, Heathcliff, this is now the story of the novel. Heathcliff, an orphan boy, all right, you see his humble beginning, an orphan boy, and Catherine are raised together at Wuthering Heights. Well, you may be wondering, who is Catherine? Catherine is a daughter of Mr. Henshaw, Earnshaw. There are two children of the Earnshaws. Hindley is the son, and Catherine is the daughter. All right. So, but you can see, you know, despite the difference in their social position, they eventually fall in love. Talking about Catherine and Heathcliff. All right. That sounds familiar. You find a situation where you have a servant in the house, and then a daughter of the house falls in love with the servant of the house. Now, this is an orphan boy. When Mr. Earnshaw is alive, he really does not treat Heathcliff as a servant. He treats Heathcliff as a beloved son. All right, so that tells us much about the character of the elderly Earnshaw. You know, things fall apart way after his death, and Hindley becomes the owner of Wuthering Heights. He reduces Heathcliff to a servant. Meanwhile, we find that Heathcliff and Catherine fall in love with each other. And although Catherine loves Heathcliff, eventually Catherine takes a decision. She chooses to marry Edgar Linton when she comes in contact with him and discovers that he's a very wealthy person. He's a wealthy neighbor. So Catherine loves Heathcliff passionately, but she decides to marry Edgar because of his, you know, his wealthy position in the society. So that is a familiar story where you see a choice being made based on, you know, other factors than love. Now, Heathcliff feels bitter over his rejection by Catherine, so he runs away. He leaves Wuthering Heights. He's angry. He feels betrayed by Catherine. Now, when he returns some years later, Heathcliff decides to marry Edgar's sister, Isabella Linton. Of course, don't forget, it is Edgar who has, you know, stolen Catherine away from Heathcliff, so to say. So Heathcliff feels extremely bad. Now he returns, and before he returns, he has become wealthy, extremely wealthy, and of course, probably he had to go and, you know, hustle to actually make the difference. And having made the difference, he returns. But now his purpose of, you know, marrying Edgar's sister is Isabella Linton is not because he loves this young woman. His purpose is to gain power over her and then use her as a tool in his revenge against her brother Edgar, who married Catherine. All right, Catherine is the only woman Heathcliff has ever loved, and he still loves Catherine, but there's nothing he can do because Catherine has married Edgar. Now, to get back at Edgar, he decides to marry Edgar's sister, called Isabella Linton. Now, you can see how revenge, you know, gives a very negative color to a good thing. Love is supposed to be sincere and honest, but because of revenge that has now taken over in the heart of this man, Heathcliff, he pretends to love Isabella, but the real motive is selfish, all right? selfish and completely negative, if you like, because to marry a woman only to get back at the woman's brother is the height of heartlessness and what can I say? You know, uh, let me say, yes, ruthlessness, if you like. All right. Meanwhile, Heathcliff has inherited the manor after Hindley dies. You know, the story of Hindley, the biological son of the Earnshaws, is a sad one. You know, this is a man who, after uh, his college education, when he comes back after his father's death, he becomes the landlord of Wuthering Heights. But then instead of following his father's footsteps in treating Heathcliff as a member of the family, Hindley now turns Heathcliff into a servant and compels him to start working on the fields like a servant. All right, so Heathcliff loses his position, his social position as one of the sons of the Earnshaws and becomes a servant in that family. And this actually contributes to the feeling of, the heart that actually characterized Heathcliff's life and his determination to revenge himself against both Hindley and Edgar, people he perceived as his enemies, people who had wronged him, all right? Now, meanwhile, because of negative habits cultivated by Hindley, all right, especially after his wife Frances dies, he descends into alcoholism and all that, descends into debt, and when he eventually dies, Heathcliff inherits the manor, that is Wuthering Heights. Now, having become the landlord of Wuthering Heights, we can see greed at work in the life of Heathcliff because he's not really satisfied with rising to that position of being the owner of such a manor, right? He wants to own the neighboring place called Thrush Grange as well. And you know, that place belongs to Mr. Linton, who is the father of Edgar and Isabella. Of course, you see that by marrying Isabella, Heathcliff plans to inherit Thrushcross Grange, all right? Now, after getting married to Heathcliff, Isabella realizes her mistake. She discovers that Heathcliff doesn't have that fine character she thought he had. She discovers Heathcliff is not really a complete gentleman, but is really a very ruthless person. All right. So at this point, Isabella confides in Nellie through letters, you know, telling her about the hostile and displeasing welcome she received at Wuthering Heights, and how she has now developed hatred for Heathcliff, who has made it clear to her that he didn't marry her because he loves her, but simply because he wants to become the heir to the Grange. Imagine, that breaks the heart of Isabella, all right? Meanwhile, you remember Catherine, the wife of Edgar Linton now, all right? She becomes ill, gives birth to a daughter whom she calls after her own name. And so her daughter is known as young Catherine. After giving birth to young Catherine, the elderly Catherine dies, all right? Now, shortly thereafter, Isabella flees to London and gives birth to Heathcliff's son named Linton, all right? And so Linton is named after Isabella's family. Don't forget that Isabella is Isabella Linton. Her father's name is Linton. And so she calls her son that she has given birth to for Heathcliff, Linton, all right? So she names her son Linton after her family. And getting to London, she keeps the boy with her there. Well, you will now discover why this novel is really a tragic novel. All the people who were loved and who loved others, got to die. So Isabella dies. Meanwhile, I've just told you that Catherine becomes ill, gives birth to her daughter, and dies. These are all tragic aspects of the novel. So when Isabella dies, Linton comes to live with Heathcliff. Don't forget that Heathcliff is the father, the biological father of Linton, born by Isabella. She only names that son after her family. All right, so Heathcliff treats his sickly, whining son even more wickedly than he has treated Isabella, the boy's mother. So we can see, the kind of negative change that has taken place in the life of Heathcliff because of the maltreatment he has experienced at the hands of Hindley Earnshaw, and because of the betrayal he has experienced at the hands of Catherine, whom he actually loves. The character of Heathcliff takes a nosedive, and he becomes bitter and negative in her behavior to the extent of treating Isabella wickedly and treating even his own biological son, Linton, very wickedly as well. Now, something happens also that reveals the greedy and selfish nature of Heathcliff. You see, his son Linton grows up, and then late Catherine's daughter, whom I told you is also called young Catherine, she grows up into a handsome young woman. All right, so but here we see Heathcliff coming out with another hidden plan. He wants to join these two youths together in marriage, and his intention is to make sure that he claims ownership over the estate known as Thrushcross Grange. Don't forget that is his real intention of marrying Isabella. And now the son, born for him by Isabella is Linton. And don't forget, Catherine was married to Edgar Linton. So both Catherine and Linton have a biological relationship with the Lintons. So you see, that is exactly the kind of plan that Heathcliff makes. He wants these two young people to get married, and this actually begins to happen when young Catherine meets with him, Heathcliff, and later visits Wuthering Heights, where she meets Linton. So both Catherine and Linton begin a secret love relationship, which happens apparently because Heathcliff is forcing his son to pursue the young woman. Now, Heathcliff hopes that if Catherine marries Linton, his legal claim over Thrushcross Grange will actually become a reality. And don't forget too that he has been looking for every possible way to get back at Edgar Linton. So all these are, you know, part of Heathcliff's plans and intentions. Now, Heathcliff eventually gets young Catherine to marry his sickly son, Linton. Now, of course, one thing about Linton, Isabella's son, is that we discover that it's a very sickly character, frail, weak, sickly, and whining. All right. So somehow, you know, young Catherine falls in love with him, and between love and sympathy and so on, you know, Catherine, you know, cultivates this relationship with the young Clinton, and with the certain measures of force and manipulation by Heathcliff, we discover that, you know, these two young people get married. And shortly after that marriage between young Catherine and Linton, Edgar, who has been growing ill, eventually dies. Thereafter, Heathcliff's sickly son Linton also dies. So we see deaths of various characters, and this is why we can describe this novel as a tragic romantic novel. It is tragic in the sense that most of the characters end in tragedy, and it is romantic in the sense that there is love, whether sincere or insincere. The theme of love runs through the novel, and we find relationships. But the most romantic of all these love relationships has been the relationship between Heathcliff and Catherine. And we see the irony of the whole thing, that this most passionate love relationship doesn't really translate into marriage. And so marriage is rather based on, well, rather than on passionate love. So these are some of the ironies we find in the novel. Now, after Edgar's death, Linton dies, that's Heathcliff's son. And we see now that Heathcliff controls both Wuthering Heights and Thrushcross Grange. He is the owner of both places. And at this point, again, we see his very wicked nature, his heartless nature, in spite of the fact that young Catherine is actually the daughter of the woman he loved when she was alive, and also in spite of the fact that this young Catherine has been the wife of his son, Linton, who has died, yet we discover that Heathcliff forces Catherine to live at Wuthering Heights and act as a common servant. All right, you can see. So his desire to revenge himself against his perceived offenders actually has turned him into a kind of beast, if you like. So, and so he, but one other reason why he wants Catherine to remain at Wuthering Heights as his son's widow is that he decides to rent Thrushcross Grange to Lockwood. Don't forget, Lockwood is now the person narrating the story of this novel. And we can now see how he comes into this setting. He comes in as a tenant at Thrushcross Grange because Heathcliff, after the death of Edgar, after the death of Isabella, meanwhile, the Lintons, the elderly Lintons, their generations have passed away. So you can see that this is a multi-generational novel, all right? And so he rents Thrushcross Grange to Lockwood. So at this point, Nelly's story comes to an end because the story has now traced the history of these two families and the relationships that have existed among the descendants, all right? And then up to the present moment. At this moment, Lockwood is currently a tenant at Thrushcross Grange. And this story shocks Lockwood so much that he decides to leave Thrushcross Garage and go back to London. All right. So that is the situation. Now, he learns about other developments in the story only when he visits Nelly 6 months later. All right, from London, where he has gone back, he visits Nelly and, learns about other developments. What are those other developments? Now, one of them is the death of Heathcliff. Heathcliff dies shortly after spending night walking on the moors. Before then, he had been so obsessed with the memory of the elder Catherine that he began speaking to her ghost. You see, the memory, his memory of Catherine, the only woman he has ever loved and who died, after giving birth to a child as the wife of Edgar, who actually took the woman Heathcliff loved. This actually left him so heartbroken that it somehow affects his mental faculties. So he gets to a point where he speaks to Catherine's ghost, all right? And we see exactly that situation haunts him. And after spending a night walking on the moors, Heathcliff dies. And so with Heathcliff's death, we see Harrington. Harrington, up to this moment, I've not told you about Harrington. Harrington is Hindley's son, that Francis, the wife, has given birth to. So we can see that a love relationship has also been developing between Harrington and young Catherine, who of course is the young widow of Heathcliff's son Linton. Now, with all these generations gone, we are having only these two persons, Harrington and young Catherine, all right? And we see that Harrington is a descendant of the Earnshaws, and Catherine is a descendant of the Lintons, but having also married into the house of Heathcliff. So we see that these two young persons are the people who actually inherit Wuthering Heights and Thrushcross Grange, and because they have grown fond of each other and have cultivated some kind of love relationship between them, they are now planning to get married on the next New Year's Day. So this is the story of Wuthering Heights, and this is the story as told by Lockwood, and who actually receives the story originally from Nelly Dean. So after hearing the end of the story, Lockwood now goes to visit the graves of Catherine and Heathcliff, and this brings the story of the novel to an end. Now, what are the themes of Wuthering Heights? Love's destructive power. We see that we see the destructive power of love. Heathcliff's love for Catherine merely destroys him. All right, he is betrayed by Heathcliff, by Catherine, and even though he actually goes out and he seems to have developed himself, his person, and become wealthier and looking like a gentleman, yet the love he has for Catherine, who has betrayed him, has literally destroyed the positive character in him. So we can see love's destructive power. All right. Catherine and Heathcliff's fierce love for one another, you know, is quite a different thing, you know, from the kind of marriages two of them actually get into. Now, on one hand, we find Catherine getting married to Edgar, and we don't see that passionate relationship between the husband and wife. It seems that, you know, the passion of love in Catherine uh, is visible only in that relationship she has cultivated with Heathcliff. We don't see that in the relationship that exists between her and Edgar. All right. And so we see that the passionate love relationship between Catherine and Heathcliff do not actually lead to marriage, but the relationship leads to negative things such as revenge. You know, love has always been a reason for revenge in different stories down the ages. You know, we find revenge. Now, even today in our society, we find a situation where a man betrayed by the woman he loves seeks revenge, sometimes to the extent of killing the woman or killing the man that the woman loves instead of him. And we find women also retaliating. So you see that there is this destructive power of love that is highlighted in this novel. Then another theme is the theme of conflict. Now, from the life of Heathcliff, we see that, of course, generally, conflict is inevitable. Hardly anyone lives life without experiencing some kind of conflict. Conflict can either be internal or external, all right? So, but one thing we also discover in this novel is that even though conflict is inevitable, it is how you respond to conflict that makes or mars your life. Now, what happens in the life of Heathcliff is that from childhood, we find him facing barriers to success in life. We find him at the beginning of the story as an adopted orphan, having to face discrimination from his adopted brother, adoptive brother, Hindley, to the extent that after the death of old Mr. Earnshaw, we find Heathcliff reduced, demoted to the position of a servant. That's a kind of conflict, all right? So initially, we find Heathcliff as somebody who seems to respond positively to his conflict, especially at the time that, you know, he moves away and then develops himself from his humble beginning to a very wealthy person. All right, so you find that sometimes conflict, you know, strengthens a man and makes him to really take a decision that he's going to make it in life. So we see Heathcliff's response somewhat positive from that angle. All right, his great natural abilities, his strength of character, his love for Catherine Earnshaw. Now, all these have actually strengthened him, and he works hard and raises himself from his humble beginnings to the status of a wealthy gentleman. However, we see a reversal of this. In the end, he allows the desire to revenge himself for Hindley's abuse or maltreatment and Catherine's betrayal. You know, all this desire for revenge leads him into a twisted life of cruelty. He becomes wicked, he becomes ruthless, he becomes heartless. All right, and this brings us to the theme of revenge, which is another very dominant recurring theme in this novel. Now, revenge we find in this novel being defined as a self-destructive force, because we see this playing out in the life of Heathcliff. All right, it's a main theme. I mean, revenge is a main theme in Wuthering Heights because, of course, it plays out in most of the important events. All right, the kind of weakness, the kind of flaw, if you like, hubris, you know, a tragic flaw that we find in Heathcliff is, you know, something that actually stems from the desire to revenge. All right, and we can find that it is really his desire to revenge himself that sets him on the path of destruction. So in the novel Wuthering Heights, we find Heathcliff, who once began his life with an open heart, all right, with passionate love for Catherine. It's a real sincere love, passionate love, wholehearted love for a woman. We see such a character, a loving character, turning to something else after being maltreated by Hindley and after being betrayed by Catherine and Edgar. All right, so he turns to a creature seeking revenge, and everything he does is actually something that is predicated upon that desire to revenge. He becomes extremely selfish, that even when he marries Isabella, a woman who really gives her heart to him, he marries her only because he wants to get back at her brother. All right, so we see his selfishness and his desire to get back at his perceived offenders as something so monumental that it eventually destroys his life. So these are the themes of Wuthering Heights. And of course, you can see that this is where we want to draw the curtain on today's video. So you can look at the various characters of this novel. Let me give you Mr. Earnshaw, the original owner of Wuthering Heights, the wife, Mrs. Earnshaw. Then Mr. Linton, the owner of Thrush Cross Grange, and the wife, Mrs. Linton. Then we see Hindley Earnshaw is the biological son of Mr. and Mrs. Earnshaw, and he marries Frances. Frances is the wife. And then we have Catherine, is the daughter of the Earnshaws, Mr. and Mrs. Earnshaw, all right? And she marries Edgar, who is the son of Mr. and Mrs. Linton, all right? Then we find Isabella, who is the daughter of Mr. Linton, and she marries Heathcliff, all right? Now, Isabella and Heathcliff give birth to Linton Heathcliff, all right, who marries Cathy Linton, all right? Cathy Linton is the daughter of Catherine Earnshaw and Edgar Linton, all right? And as I told you earlier, shortly after giving birth to the young Catherine, the elder Catherine dies, all right? So, and then we find Harrington Earnshaw, who is the son of Hindley and Frances. Okay, so we see 3 generations, all right, if you like. Now, so you can see Harrington and young Catherine get married, all right? They are getting married. Of course, the story of the novel ends on that note. They are getting married, all right? So that is really the story of Wuthering Heights, and I hope you enjoyed the entire video. If you did, kindly like the video and share the video with your friends and relations. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you have not done so, because on this channel, it is sure you get great value whenever a new video is uploaded. And if you actually want to always receive instant notification whenever a new video goes live on the channel, you need to click on the bell icon in order to activate the notification system. Now, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, please leave them in the comments section below. All right, so I want to say a big thank you to all of you out there for being part of today's episode. I look forward to seeing you in the next class. Bye-bye for now, and remain blessed. Many thanks for watching today's video. A big thank you to all of you out there for being part of today's episode. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, kindly subscribe to this channel. Subscribe now as a way of giving us support. For notification about new videos, click on the bell icon. You will find the bell icon. Click on it so that whenever a new video is uploaded, you will be instantly notified. If you have actually enjoyed the video, like and share the video with your friends and relatives. This is very important. If you have any comments, leave your comments below. Any questions, any suggestions, we would gladly receive them and respond promptly and positively to them. See you in the next video. I look forward to always seeing you in the new video. Thank you.